I'm Carrie Hyde, and I'm your Pets Life Coach. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to our full-length podcast we did with our next guest, I encourage you to do so. For those of you who have listened, I want to welcome again. Talking with me is Dr. Richard Pitcairn. Dr. Pitcairn, hi.
Hi there.
So just to kind of recap a little bit, Dr. Pitcairn is a homeopathic veterinarian, and he teaches homeopathy to an enormous amount of veterinarians all over the country. And we did a podcast that aired 2 weeks ago, and he got into the history of homeopathy with us, and we kind of learned a little bit. And for the listeners who know me, you know me as a pet nutritionist, but homeopathy is something that I'm just starting to branch out to. So I'm learning along with you. And as I always do, because I know when people listen to podcasts, sometimes they end up walking away with a little bit of questions, because we obviously can't reach deep down and get into every single thing. So I've been fortunate enough to have some really great people like Dr. Pitcairn who are willing to come back on in case there's some questions from you listening to that. So we're going to jump into it a little bit with some questions. Lori's behind the scenes, so she's going to be typing out any of your questions that you have. I'm going to ask Dr. Pitcairn for you, and then his answers, if they're going to direct you somewhere, or anything, we're going to type those out so you'll be able to have access to that. So, but Dr. Pitcairn, before we get into some of the questions, can you remind anybody who hasn't, or some of our new listeners, how long you've been practicing veterinary medicine and how long you've been doing homeopathy?
It's kind of embarrassing, Carrie.
No.
I started in 1965. I graduated from University of California at Davis. And I went into practice in 1965. So it's been quite a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah. But
I started doing homeopathy. I won't give the whole story, but I can say briefly that, just for the audience, that I went into practice, and then after just a few years, I got a chance to go up and join the faculty at Washington State University Veterinary School. And I taught there, and then I did research, and then I entered a PhD program, which I did for 6 years. And so I had all this background, and nonetheless, it's a story in itself. I gradually shifted over to focusing on homeopathy as a preferred method. And I've been doing that a little over 40 years, I think going on to 45 now. And I had a practice in Oregon that did only homeopathy for about 20 years.
Wow. You know what's interesting when you say that homeopathy is your preferred method? I think so many times people think, we'll try this and we'll do a little bit of homeopathy, but for true homeopaths, it's the preferred way. And why is that? Why would you lean more towards doing homeopathy versus traditional?
Well, I would say, I'm just generalizing, but I think what I'll say here is true for most of us that go into veterinary medicine, is we have the desire to help animals, right? Or if you go into medicine, to help people, and you want to relieve them of their suffering. That is your intention and your goal. And one of the frustrations from the methods I had learned in veterinary school, was I was not seeing that happen very much. I could relieve symptoms with drugs, but I didn't really see them becoming healthy.
Yeah.
So homeopathy, when I started using that, I did see animals come back to normal health, even better than they had before. And that was really satisfying on an emotional level.
Yeah. I know for me, anytime I just had a dog the other day, and it's not homeopathy, but it's just that rewarding feeling. I just do ozone baths on dogs, and just one ozone bath with this dog, the swelling went down, and the feeling of watching that happen is pretty amazing. I just want to welcome a couple of our listeners are coming in. So we have Debbie and Sally. Sally says, "Nice to meet you, Dr. Pitcairn. I have had one of your books and I love it."
Oh, good. Thank you.
Debbie, so before I get to Debbie's question, I want to just say that not just as somebody who does homeopathy, I'm going to kind of speak for Dr. Pitcairn or any veterinarians that I have on the show. I want y'all, Dr. Pitcairn's going to do the best he can to answer your questions, but he cannot treat any animals or offer up any kind of veterinary medicine advice necessarily, because he would have to see your pet, especially as a homeopathic veterinarian. But Debbie does want to know, she has a question, if you have any good remedies for geriatric vestibular disease. So maybe we could talk a little bit about what vestibular disease is and maybe kind of guide her a little bit, if homeopathy would be something that would work for her.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Going back to what I said a moment ago, Carrie, besides seeing satisfactory results, I was surprised to see homeopathy could cover many more diseases than the method I was taught in school. So yes, homeopathy can completely resolve it. Vestibular disease is where they have trouble with balance. And that's your function, where you maintain the ability to walk and move and so on without falling over. Though, let me explain, if I may, briefly, some context of this question.
Please.
The method we're used to, the conventional method that's prominent right now, dominant in our system, our society, there's this idea of diagnosis, and once you have the diagnosis, then there's basically usually one or two standard drugs you use to treat it. Homeopathy is just the opposite of that. Homeopathy is completely individualized. That is, when, say, if I'm presented with a dog with vestibular disease and I were to look up that symptom or that condition, there could easily be 20 remedies that could be applied. And you don't give all 20, you give one. Only one will really be effective. So how do you determine that one? When the homeopathic method is we use the term sometimes holistic, meaning that you're looking at the whole pattern. And I'll explain more about what I mean by that. So if you bring your dog in and it's having trouble balancing, I will ask about other symptoms that are present at the same time, maybe to do with appetite or other functions, but also symptoms that were present earlier in its life. It's all considered to all be one pattern of susceptibility. So maybe 6 months ago, there was a knee problem, or a year ago, there was some, problem with bowels or something. So the homeopathic practitioner takes all of that information together and finds out of the 20 remedies, say, which one fits the whole pattern.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you can see why it would be so important that the right person understands that, to go that far back. Like you said, maybe there was a knee problem a year ago, to be able to have that history and go back, which I'm going to say would be, if we're going to start having our pets and ourselves even be treated by homeopathic medicine, we need to keep really good records on what's happening, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much, not so much records in the sense of medical tests and things, but more records in terms of memory of what was actually observed. It's kind of funny in a way. I'll give you an example. You have to learn when you're doing this kind of work with people, with animals, and you have to interview the client, because you only see the animal for a short time. So let's say, going back to the vestibular problem, let's say I start asking about, well, when does this happen? Does this occur all the time, all day long, or just only at certain periods? Does it have anything to do with eating? Does it get worse after the dog is eaten, and so on? So you ask these kind of questions to find out more detail. And one of the questions one will ask is, when did it all begin? And it's kind of funny, I think that people will often say, well, I don't remember. I just can't remember when it started. So then the question I learned to ask was, when did you know to take your dog to the veterinarian for this? Oh, that was back last April.
Wow.
So then they can start to remember things, you see. So that, yes, you have to have some information. You have to know some details about it. Because, for example, going back to the 20 homeopathic remedies that may be suitable for this problem, one of them may only have the dizziness, at nighttime. Another one may have it only if they run too fast.
Yeah.
You see, so that's what you have to determine. You come down to, well, which one fits the pattern?
Wow. It must be really, really hard it's not, I don't even know how to ask this question. It must be really hard to teach people do you think there's some level of instinct that has to come into play, that you can't teach everybody to be a homeopath?
You're talking about veterinarians?
Yeah, veterinarians. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can train veterinarians, but to put it simply, Carrie, if a veterinarian comes into a training program and they've learned the older method, which we learn in veterinary school, which is almost completely opposite of the homeopathic. That is, the conventional method uses drugs to basically suppress symptoms so they don't express themselves without curing the problem. The homeopathic method doesn't do that at all. It goes to the root of the problem and corrects that, and the body heals itself then. So you can't do both. You've got to do one or the other. You can't mix them. So the veterinarian that comes in for training has to give up that other way of thinking to be effective.
Wow, that's got to be hard. I
It
can
is
imagine.
hard.
It's
Some
totally
can't do it.
Completely retraining your brain.
That's right.
Because you want to see the symptoms. All of them, right?
Yes, you have to open your mind to exploring, because you know how it is. It may be the case. Some of the people listening may have had the experience. They take their animal into the veterinarian for some problem, and then they'll start mentioning something they observed about it, and the veterinarian is honestly not listening or pushing it off.
Yeah.
You see, but it's the opposite with homeopathy. We want to know all that detail. So it's funny in a way. So people do gradually, clients will start to pick up on that and start to learn. Oh, they want to hear me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, all those things that somebody might not think are a symptom is so important to the homeopath. So you have to be, I would imagine the easiest way to help a patient is to have a really good pet parent that's paying close attention also.
Yes.
They'd have to.
It can be, if it's a more immediate problem, it can be brief, like somebody adopts a dog and a couple of days later gets sick, but they are able to observe, how they act and what's going on. And that's the information we need.
Wow.
So in a way, it's a limitation. We have to have it to be successful.
Yeah. We have so many people coming in, and a lot of hello from Virginia. She's in Virginia. This is from Lily. Angelo says he also has one of your books. You're a very popular guy. I think most of us
Two people have a book. I'm very popular.
Well, no, there's a lot I can't read. I'm trying to read all of them, but I think we all started off with your book, and I think a lot of veterinarians started off with your book, and you continue to bring out, you have a new book out, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been out a couple of years.
Yeah. What's that one? It's just volume or number 3, right?
It's the 4th edition.
The 4th edition. I am so sorry.
Yeah.
So make sure you guys keep up on those and get the new editions and stuff. So a couple other questions that are coming through. Susan wants to know, can homeopathy help with anxiety? Do you believe it can help with anxiety?
Absolutely.
Okay. You would just need to know, I mean, there's so many causes of anxiety, right? So many going down into the root of what's causing anxiety.
Well, of course, animals are not as complicated psychologically as we are. So, you know how people can get anxious about all sorts of thoughts that come into their mind. Animals usually, one reason for it would be something happened to them that frightened them. And they get, say for instance, a dog gets hit by a car. And after that, they're afraid when they hear a car, understandably. That might. I would say a more common reason that especially that dogs become anxious is the vaccination for rabies. That's one of the after effects of it.
Yeah.
And they'll go from being very calm and normal to being anxious animals.
I've seen dogs literally that I have taken care of for years and had no issues with them, and then they get the rabies vaccine, and then they come in for grooming, and now they're trying to bite me, and they're vicious.
Yeah.
And I think, what happened? And I will, because I'm really good at like talking to the client, let's figure this out. I can tell you how many times I found out that the dog was given a rabies vaccine a couple weeks ago.
Right.
And they
very
think
common.
they think I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, I've taken care of your dog for 10 years. I've never seen him act like
Yeah.
this. This doesn't make sense. And he was just here 3 weeks ago. So I think the rabies vaccine actually does definitely cause some kind of issues and stuff.
Well, it's a symptom of rabies. There's a tremendous amount of anxiety when they have the disease. That's not the
Yeah.
only symptom, of course, but it is very prominent in the disease of rabies, both in people and in animals. So what people don't realize in terms of the vaccination is that when they're given the virus, the rabies virus that's been modified through laboratory culture or something, so that it won't cause the whole picture of rabies, you understand? It won't cause the usual rabid dog. It won't do that.
Right.
But it does transfer to the dog many of the tendencies towards the symptoms of rabies,
Yeah.
especially on an emotional level. So another one, for example, that's very common in dogs that get rabies vaccination is the desire to escape. And after that, sometimes dogs can't be confined. They'll dig out wherever they are and run away.
Ugh.
But
Yeah,
it can all be corrected easily with just a simple treatment with homeopathy.
Yeah. So Kim says, this is like Christmas. Thank you so much for this wonderful podcast.
I
She
should have
says
worn my longer beard.
she's purchased 12 copies of the
Woo.
4th edition. So there you go. Numbers are going up. It's just such a great.
Well, get her address. I'll send her a royalty.
All right, Kim, did you hear that? So there's a lot of questions about, can homeopathy help with this condition and this condition? So I think to kind of help a little bit, is there any condition you think homeopathy couldn't help with?
Yes. First of all, just to go back and reemphasize what I said, if we consider the spectrum of the conventional medical system that we know in our culture, okay, and it's sometimes called the allopathic system, doesn't matter what it's called, but that system has a certain coverage, right? We know there are some conditions that are considered untreatable or incurable. If we look at the umbrella for homeopathy, I'm telling you, it's much, much bigger than this other system. It covers almost everything. Now, the question is, well, what won't it cover? Well, first of all, we just talked about that. It won't cover cases where there's not enough information to know what to do.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean it can't be still covered. For example, somebody could bring their animal to me. Maybe they weren't observant, or they've recently adopted the animal, excuse me, and I can tell them what I need, and they go home, and a week later they come back with information. That can happen. The other limitation is if the disease has gone too far, in the sense the body can no longer heal itself. So again, I'm going to back up a little bit and say the homeopathic method does not rely on a drug effect. When we give a remedy, and maybe it's only given once, it's not acting like a drug. What it does is stimulate the body to rebalance and heal itself. So the body has to have the ability to heal itself.
And the time, I would imagine, right?
Yes, but more like if the animal's been brought to me after being sick for years and having lots of other treatment, and maybe surgeries. Let's say, for example, the thyroid was removed. I can't bring the thyroid back to normal function. There's no thyroid there.
That makes
You see?
sense. Yes.
Yeah, so there are certain things where the body has been so altered by other treatments, it just can't repair itself anymore.
That makes sense. Somebody had asked, and I'm sorry for everyone who's listening if I don't get your names. Some of these questions are going pretty fast, and I'm remembering the question, but not who wrote it. Somebody had asked about Cushing's disease, if you thought homeopathy could help with Cushing's disease.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But that led me to think about, hormonal issues that might be brought on from being spayed and neutered. I mean, once we're spayed. And so is it hard to balance out hormones from an animal who has been spayed?
No, not because removing the ovaries or the testicles does remove hormones, but if you say you have an imbalance in the adrenal glands, that's not going to be affected by having had the surgery, the spay and neuter. The adrenals still can be corrected.
Okay. But I understand what you're saying as far as the body has to have its thyroid if you're going to fix the thyroid.
Yeah, otherwise,
Yeah.
if it doesn't have a thyroid, it's got to stay on the hormone.
Yeah.
You may be able with homeopathy to improve it to some degree, but you'll never bring it back to optimal normal again because it's not possible. And it's surprising how much surgery does have effects like that, where you just can't bring it back anymore because it's been altered so much.
Right. Right.
So, but yeah, homeopathy can basically, there are a lot of people are going to ask about this disease, can homeopathy treat that? And I'm going to say, yes, it can treat all of those things, but it depends on the state of your animal. If your animal's hasn't had it for a long time and been sick for years and had lots of other treatment, it's going to be quite curable if you go to somebody who knows how to do it.
So we touched on this in the podcast where we had talked about stores, and I won't name any, but where they sell little homeopathy, homeopathic treatments. But what I'm learning from you is that's something where they kind of suggest that your dog just stay on that. But what you're saying is when you work with a homeopath, they will put their own. So most homeopaths combine their own tinctures, I guess, or pellets, I think we had talked about, in order to treat that particular animal. So going to the grocery store.
No, you never combine the remedies. Only one
Okay.
remedy is given. What you're talking about is you go into a store and they have, say for itching or for diarrhea, and
Right.
they have several remedies in the vial combined together. So let me explain to you briefly how that happens. Okay.
Yeah.
Go back to the situation with vestibular, and let's say there's 20 remedies known in the homeopathic references that we use that can be treating that condition. And there is what's called grading. In other words, some remedies are a little bit more frequently effective than others. Okay, there's usually 3 or 4 levels. So let's say I'm a pharmacist and I want to make up a formula for that purpose. So what I do is I pick the top 6 and mix them together with the assumption that one of them will work. So what it is that they're selling you a mixture with the hopes that one of them will have an effect and not really prescribing the one that's needed by itself, which is what is effective. So it's a way of making money, and it's a way of doing more allopathic homeopathy, if you want to call it that, where you use it like a drug.
Which is so it's not less like it's not going to work, most likely, right?
It may have some effect, but you have to keep using it
forever, and that's not what
usually you usually have to keep repeating it. And no, if you use the appropriate homeopathic remedy, often 1 or 2 doses will turn it all around. For maybe you have to give another dose a month or 2 later, but I mean, you don't keep giving it. That's not the way homeopathy is done.
Do you think, I'm going to get to some more of your questions, I promise, but I also promise that my questions are here to help you. Do you think that a pet parent, I know that the school that you taught, because I tried to get in it and I couldn't because I'm not a veterinarian, which is fair. I completely understood why I wasn't allowed to go, because we have to be careful letting people practice homeopathy when they're not veterinarians. And so I understand that.
Yes. And also, Carrie, the problem is with the state boards.
Right.
Because if I trained you as a homeopathic veterinarian, you start practicing, I'm going to be in doo-doo.
In big trouble. Yeah, we don't want that.
No.
But do you think that a pet parent can just on their own, most of our listeners don't have access to a homeopathic veterinarian. There aren't even hardly any homeopathic, there's none in my area. So can a pet parent learn on their own how to treat their own pet, do you think, very easily? Or
well, certainly for relatively simple problems. Yes, there are books that are, that more like simplified books. Like, for example, it's pretty easy to learn how to treat injuries. You can learn to recognize the remedies and match them up to the injuries that you see, like excessive bleeding, severe bruising, fractures. You can learn that if you want to study. You're going to have to read and study a little bit, learn the remedies. Yeah. But certainly it's very practical to do that. You can also learn about some infections and things. But when you get into like we were talking about earlier, say vestibular or heart disease or cancer or whatever, it's more complicated. You have to have the knowledge
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
cases are complex and you have to kind of unravel them like a puzzle.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Lily asks, she says that her dog started limping on his right back leg after slipping on grass in her yard after catching a ball, and then he fell. She's been giving him Arnica 30C 2 pellets every 4 hours. He is not putting any weight on his back leg. Do you have any thoughts on this? My first thought, Lily, would be is how long has this been going on?
Yeah. How long
And
has she
then,
been treating him?
yeah, we need to know how long, Lily. But do you have any thoughts just kind of on just giving
Well, sometimes if say you give arnica and you keep repeating it like every 4 hours for a week, you can cause the problem to get worse.
Really?
Yeah, you can overdose. You don't use
Wow.
the remedies that way. If arnica is a remedy needed, 1 or 2 doses will take care of it.
And if it doesn't, then that's not the right remedy.
It's not the right remedy. So ask her if she can respond and say, how long have you been doing this? And how long ago did the injury happen?
Okay. Yeah, I asked, so hopefully oh wait, she says just since Wednesday at 1:00 is when it happened. So today's
Well, if there's no improvement
Friday.
now by Friday, then it's not the right remedy. It's
Okay.
very possible what happened there was an injury to the joint. The remedy then that's usually most effective is Rhus tox. That's spelled ARHUS, and second word TOX abbreviated usually, which you can get in the store. 1 or 2 doses of that, say a dose in the evening and then 1 in the morning is usually enough. If it's going to work, that's enough. You don't have to keep repeating it.
Okay. I think that's something I want to keep reiterating that I'm learning from you is that homeopathy should work. And if it's not, you're on the wrong remedy, which is the whole thing. Because that's what you had taught me about, you go and these remedies you buy at the store, you have to stay on it forever, which means it's not balancing the body. It's not working.
No.
So is there a time limit for it, or is it always 2 days? Like with this situation, you're saying if it's not working by Friday, it's not going to work. Is there?
I would say if it's an injury to the joint and she gives a remedy this evening, a Rhus tox, and again in the morning, by tomorrow afternoon, the dog will be noticeably better.
Okay. And then she's asking, she's typed it out. Did you say it's RHUSTUX?
RHUS is the first word.
Uh-huh.
And the second word is actually toxicodendron, but on the vial it will be TOX period.
Okay.
And I get a 30C and I give 2 doses and that's enough.
Okay.
And if that doesn't work, there's other remedies.
Then you got to just keep on finding the right remedy. So.
Yeah. So get a book on treatment of, it doesn't have to be a book for animal treatment. Just get a book on using homeopathy. It's the same in people and animals. There's no difference really.
Okay. Is there a particular book you might, someone else is asking?
There's quite a few out there.
But it doesn't matter whether it's human or it's the same.
I use the same books. I use the same references that are used for human beings.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm trying to read through some of these questions. You have so much stuff coming through here that I'm trying to kind of group them if I can, and also to get that done. So what about arthritis? I know a lot of people will use the arnica for arthritis, but are there any other?
No, arnica is not
people
suitable.
Do it.
No.
It's not?
No. It may have some partial effect, but it's not the remedy for arthritis, no. Arthritis is a chronic disease.
Okay.
And it's got to be treated with appropriate remedy for chronic diseases. There's a different group for that.
Do you have any suggestions on where to start for somebody? Her dog, it looks like, has long-term arthritis.
Well, Rhus tox is one that's commonly used. I mean, there's probably 40 remedies for arthritis. So it's, again, the same pattern. That's why the homeopathic practice. See, we have these books. Let me show you an example. Couldn't quite reach it. See, we have books like this. This is a reference book. This book it's called a repertory. And what it is 1,000 pages of nothing but symptoms listed with all the remedies that match that symptom. So we use references like that, and we look up. So if you have arthritis, okay, you've got inflammation of the joints, and then we look up, for example, is it worse after exercise? Is it worse when the weather's cold? Is it painful when it's touched? And so on and on, you see?
Wow.
And we narrow down to the remedy that fits that particular animal. But going back to what I said a moment ago, there are some that are very common. Rust tox is a very common one. And also another one related to that is called bryonia, Bryonia, bryonia. The bryonia is worse from moving. Rust tox is worse after moving, usually, for example. So you just give, again, 1 or 2 doses and not keep repeating it. And let me emphasize to you, Carrie, that when we're dealing with a chronic condition, the response is slower. I said if it's an injury, like it's not unusual, for example, if you fell down and hurt yourself, you hit your head or something, or hurt your hand, and it was really painful, and I were to give you the remedy, whether it be arnica or whatever, that seemed appropriate, you would be noticeably improved in 10 minutes.
Wow.
Okay. Joints are a little slower. That's why maybe the dog won't be noticeable until tomorrow. If it's a chronic disease, you usually won't see the response until 2 or 3 days or more after the remedy. Usually I give it about a week, because the body is not in such an active state. It's more a low level of continued problems, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope it makes sense to our listeners. I can't get feedback from them unless they write, but I thought it made sense.
I'm seeing the nodding out there.
What?
I'm seeing them all nodding.
Oh, you got me. What about sourcing? Let's talk. Somebody had asked about if you could get the rust tox at Walmart, but what about the sourcing? That's got to be important, right? Where we're getting stuff from, who's making it.
Yeah, there are a number of pharmacies, homeopathic pharmacies. Probably the one people will run into most often is called Boiron, Boiron, and it's usually a little blue plastic tube. That's the one you find in Whole Foods and natural grocers and places like that. There are some other pharmacies, but they're not as usually widely distributed. But you can also order directly from a pharmacy if you want.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think it's better to order directly from a pharmacy, or?
I think Boiron is a good product. You can use that. Boiron is fine. I've ordered from pharmacies myself just simply because, I sometimes have a wider range of what I'm getting. But Boiron is fine. And if you can't find what you want, then you can contact a pharmacy. There's a list. I think there's one on my website, if I remember right.
Okay.
Pharmacies. I hope I'm right about that.
That's okay. Can you tell us the website real quick? Lori will type it out for us, but
yes,
so that everybody has
it's
it.
drpitcairn.com, and it's spelled DR, all one word, drpitcairn.com.
Okay. And then Kim wants to know if you can explain a little bit about the pellets and the 30C remedies and the differences between that.
Yeah, I'd have to go a little bit into the story of homeopathy. Is that okay?
Yeah, just so you don't have to get too deep, but I just want to remind Kim, if you didn't listen to the podcast, he does get into that pretty heavily in the podcast. So if he can't really get too much of it now, you can listen to it in the podcast, because I know we got pretty deep into the differences between the pellets, but maybe you could just give us a little bit.
Yeah, when the homeopathic method was a discovery by a doctor about over 200 years ago. There's a doctor that was trying to do research on use of medicines, trying to figure out how they could work best and how they could cure disease and so on. Because so much at that time, as even now, was based on using medicines based on ideas and theories and, alchemy and all sorts of different ideas that weren't necessarily very well proven. So this doctor was very focused on, I want to really understand what medicines are reliable and how they work. So that was the basis for the discovery. And this doctor discovered then this homeopathic method. And when he did that, when he found that he could use medicines to stimulate the body to heal, he also then after that found, let's say, for example, let's go back to Russ Tox, that he found out that Russ Tox, because Russ Tox is made from poison ivy
Wow.
from the plant.
That's so interesting.
And so he found out that it went, and that was used in medicine at that time, to give a certain amount of it as a dose. So once he understood how that could be used, he found in observing patients that if he gave them the usual dose of the Russ Tox poison ivy extract, sometimes it acted too strongly. And before they got better, they got worse for a while, for a few hours. So he said, I think I have to give a smaller dose. So that was another discovery. So he diluted it. And when he diluted it, he was, the doctor, Dr. Hahnemann that did this, was quite a chemist as well. And he diluted it 1 to 100 times. So what I mean by that, 1 drop of the poison ivy extract and
Right.
99 drops of water and alcohol as a dilution. And then he would shake it up. And the C is a Roman numeral for 100. So that was a 1C.
Wow.
And so he used that. And that was pretty good, but that still sometimes was too powerful. So then he developed the 2C, where he did it twice. You follow me? He diluted it another time.
Yep.
So it eventually, in his lifetime, where he practiced over 50 years, he finally got up to a 30C for some patients that were too sensitive. Not all were that sensitive, but some were. And then the third discovery he made was that when he made this dilution and shook it up vigorously, it seemed to become more powerful. And that's where the potency came in. It was more potent.
Wow.
So 30C is where it's been dilution 1 to 130 times and shaken up vigorously. So there's no actual poison ivy in that anymore. It's far gone.
It's far gone.
It's just the energy of the plant that's there.
It's just so interesting to me that people that people's brains work in this way, that they can do this. Before I forget,
it was a discovery, Carrie. It wasn't like he figured it out. He observed it.
Isn't that how most things are, kind of an observation? And I say that all the time when people say, well, there's no studies, no one's paid for that study yet. And I thought, everything we have was an observation.
Right.
And then it became, someone either pays for the study or they don't pay for the study, but that doesn't mean it's irrelevant because there's not a study on it, because we live in this world now that unless someone's paid millions of dollars for their studies.
Yes.
Before I forget, because I want to make sure that I say this, because I don't want to get a dog injured. When we were talking about the dog that had fallen, she shouldn't be giving the arnica at the same time as the
remedies interfere with each other.
Okay.
You see, what you're doing, another way to put it, Carrie, so people can understand, is that when you give the remedy, you're basically, in a way, put it into words, you're saying to the dog, I want you to pay full attention to the effect of this.
Okay.
I'm putting it into words, but
right.
on a medicinal or energetic level, you're giving it to the animal so that their body or they as an organism will now give full attention to it and respond in a nice way to it.
Okay.
You don't want to divide the attention by giving 2 things.
That makes sense.
Now it has to say, which one do I respond to?
Okay.
That's the principle.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Going on to pellets, I have Lily says that sometimes her dog chews them. Is that a problem, or is there a better way?
All they have to do is taste it.
Okay. So it doesn't matter how they get it. Okay. That's good to know.
No, for some animals, sometimes for cats, for example, it's easier to dissolve it in a little milk or dissolve it in water and put it in their mouth with a little oral syringe or something. But, dogs could take it out of your palm and eat them, and that's fine. No problem.
Okay,
Work
good.
fine. It's better if they don't eat at the same time, if possible.
So has there ever, I think we probably talked about this on the podcast, but one of the things I love about homeopathy is that, from my understanding, and I could be wrong, as you all know, I'm learning a lot about homeopathy with Dr. Pitcairn's help, but Can you overdose a dog on homeopathy?
Yes,
And
yes.
can you can an animal die from homeopathy, or has there been cases of dogs
It's
dying from it?
possible. It's not too likely because it's, you're not giving a drug in the usual sense. But let's say the factor we have to address here, Carrie, is the animal's particular sensitivity. Okay.
Right.
One animal will not be particularly sensitive to it. They may respond to it, but they're not going to be that much affected by it compared to another animal that's very sensitive to it. And with that animal, if you keep repeating it, it's going to make them sick.
Okay.
You're overdosing. It's not
So,
sick because it's a drug. It's sick because it's disturbing their health.
right. So what about taking, starting at the highest dilution? And I know you said you should be getting reactions very quickly, but what if you started at 30C and there was no reaction? Would you keep working your way back down for a couple of days, or at what point would you say it's the wrong? Because
I would say if you give it and wait a few days and there's no reaction, it's likely not the right remedy. Now, it's possible, a small probability, but sometimes they need a higher potency. But that's where you'd have to work with a practitioner to
right.
go above a 30C. I
Okay.
wouldn't assume it. Most of the time, it just means it's not the right remedy.
When you say you'd have to work with a practitioner, is that because a pet parent wouldn't be able to get a hold of a 30C, or is that where you get into real dangerous stuff where you really want to be careful?
Well, it's just too complicated. It's
Okay.
just like you want to say, you have trouble with your computer and you look online and see what to do and it doesn't work for you. Well, you've got to go to an expert and you don't understand how, right? It's
Right.
beyond
Right.
you.
Right.
Well, that's the way it is with these chronic diseases. They can get very complicated. The chronic disease is different than an acute disease. An acute disease is like an injury or a poisoning or, an emotional shock or something. Chronic disease is something that's slower, goes on a long time, sometimes for the life of the animal, like allergies, arthritis, bowel problems, heart disease, et cetera, et cetera. So they tend to be more complicated in figuring out which remedy matches the whole pattern, first of all. But then when the animal's been treated by other veterinarians that use other methods that are not curative, it becomes really a puzzle.
Wow.
It's hard you can do it if you have the experience and the knowledge, but it's a challenge to figure out what to do because you see what's happening. Let me put it like this. If you just say there is in a sense, I'll use the word natural. The chronic disease is natural in the sense it comes on to the animal, they develop symptoms, they're expressing the nature of that disease themselves. Okay? You come in now with other treatment, like a drug or surgery or something. Now we've added to the natural disease other factors that alter the natural disease demonstration of itself.
Wow.
Now the medicine, the remedy we need to find is hard to recognize to the natural disease because the natural disease has been altered in its appearance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's also very obvious to me why, in the beginning of the show, you had said, it's a little embarrassing how long I've been doing this. But I can't imagine someone who's only been doing it for a couple of years to even have even close to what the knowledge that you've had. And you're probably still learning, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I say that a lot,
Yeah.
I always want to have people around me in my life that are still learning, because I don't think we can ever stop learning.
Yes, I will underline that. I don't mean to shock anybody, but learning never ends.
It shouldn't. It really shouldn't. And I think it's really sad when people, we have talked about some of the shows that I want to bring on the show are not stuff that I already know. I want to learn with my listeners, and so bringing on homeopathy, I'm very upfront about. I've spent so much time learning and about nutrition because it was such a big part, but I have to expand out. And this is a little sneak peek I want to tell you guys about. But Dr. Pitcairn and I are going to be doing an episode. It won't be live. It's going to be a podcast that you can listen to. We're going to be talking actually with his wife. I'm very excited. We're going to be talking about plant-based diets, which most people who know me probably are going to be shocked that I would talk about it. But I'm excited. I'm excited to learn what Dr. Pitcairn has to say about plant-based diets, and his wife is a wonderful nutritionist. So we're going to learn a lot there. But I bring that up now. I was going to bring it up at the end because I want to talk about how homeopathy, like this is the only example I can give, but when humans get cancer and sometimes they want to go and do both. They want to do holistic, but then their oncologist says, oh, you have to do chemotherapy. So now they try to do chemotherapy with holistic. How detrimental is that to a practicing homeopath when they get a patient who says, I'm scared, and I understand the fear. I'm scared not to do what my allopathic vet says, but how about I just incorporate in the homeopathy? How bad is that as a homeopathic for you to hear?
It doesn't work.
It just doesn't work. It's that simple.
No,
it just doesn't work.
No, the chemotherapy simply blocks the remedy from acting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, I would just add, I know we don't want to get into this, but the use of chemotherapy is not particularly effective,
Sure.
The studies and research has shown that.
Sure.
So I would say if somebody really is, they feel drawn to using an alternative method, give it a real chance, make a decision one way or the other. Because
have you ever had to tell a client, look, I can't help you if you're going to still continue. I'm going through this with my father right now. I got him to a naturopath doctor who wants to do X, Y, and Z, but he wants to keep doing this. And she told him, I can't help you. And I gave her a lot of kudos for that. Have you had to tell your clients that?
Yeah, just what I explained to you. That if I try to, I'm wasting their time, to say, okay, let's find the remedy, and then we give that at the same time using it. Some drugs don't interfere that much because they're not very powerful. In other words, if you're taking something that's not having much effect, it really doesn't get in the way because it's not having any effect.
Yeah.
But if it's chemotherapy or something like that, you're basically shutting down the mechanism the body will use to heal itself from the remedy. It shuts down the immune system. You see?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So how in the world can you expect to use a remedy that's meant to stimulate the body's natural healing while you shut down the natural healing mechanism?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me because I see this, just had this situation happen today where somebody wants me to do medicated baths on their dog, but they don't want to change the diet. I can't help. There's so much more going on there than just me doing a medicated bath. So it's the same thing. I see this all the time where,
well, it's sort of like if whatever's causing it is continued,
yeah,
then it's silly to try to fix it without taking care of that, addressing that issue, right?
Yeah, I usually will tell my clients, look, it'll give them a little bit of relief for a day or two, but we're not helping the situation because we're not addressing the cause. So I'm going to give you a question. This comes across from Tammy. Tammy says, hello from New Jersey. Is there a remedy for a cat that is exhibiting generalized marked bronchial pattern where the major differential is feline asthma or idiopathic feline pulmonary fibrosis that has shown up on an X-ray and has gotten worse in a few months?
Sure.
There is.
Homeopathy could address that, certainly.
Okay. So Tammy,
I might mention, Carrie, that there is a listing of veterinarians that have trained with us on my website.
Right. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes. For those of you who are listening, who are asking, someone had asked if you do consultations, but you're retired, right? So Dr. Pitcairn
Carrie, I just turned 80. Do you think it's time I can relax a little bit?
Yeah, he turned 80 and I'm pulling him back in a little bit here or there. So, but he has taught many, many people and they are spread out all over the country. Not as much as we would hope, but I think his books will help. And he's been so gracious to come on here and help us a little bit. But
it's my pleasure.
little pull, a little bit, anything we can get from you.
Well, they go to my
So,
website. There's a menu at the top of the window called referrals.
okay,
And then one of
perfect.
them, I don't remember exactly the word on there, but you'll see there's one of the choices is when you click on it, it takes you to a listing of states. And you can go to the state you're in and find the veterinarians in that state that work with homeopathy. There's also a link there it's listed as health consultants.
Okay.
And they are veterinarians that have also been trained, but they're willing to work with you perhaps by phone or email.
So I have to tell you this because I agree with this, but Lily says you look wonderful, Dr. Pitcairn.
Oh, thank you.
So, and
Good
I
act, huh?
agree. What?
Good act.
No, I agree. I think it's all, your mind is so amazing. I think it just keeps the body, continually going. And
Well, I'm very lucky that my mind still works. It is interesting, because I started out way back earlier in my life. I had a chronic problem that couldn't resolve with the usual treatments, and that's when I started trying other things, changing my diet, exercising, looking for alternatives. And so I can say to all of you, with a couple of exceptions in terms of getting some diagnosis and advice, I haven't had a doctor or medical treatment for 50 years.
wow. I mean, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing, especially since we're living in a world. I mean, I have some fabulous clients, and between them and their pets, they're always at the doctor. They're
Hmm.
always in and in, which leads me to this next question because we're going to be coming up on our hour here.
Okay.
It's not necessarily well, it's kind of a question, but I want to talk about how long she's been doing this. She says, I've been using a homeopathic product called Tea Relief daily for my 15-year-old. Sorry, I lost it. For my 15-year-old pug's arthritis. It does help. I had no idea that remedies shouldn't be used that long term. Do you think that that's just something that if she stopped I mean, what would you think about that?
I think that the problem would be more obvious than it was on. She's doing what the process she's doing there is called palliation. It's like using a regular drug like aspirin or something. You're
Okay.
relieving the symptoms temporarily. If it's possible for her, she'll do better to consult with a homeopathic veterinarian that will guide her to her specific remedy that's needed to resolve it.
Just to resolve it completely. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with Tea Relief?
No, I'm not.
No, no. I
Mm.
don't, so I wouldn't know what's in that or anything to
It's
talk about
probably a
it. So
combination of different remedies. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um,
I'll
so
bet Russ Tox is in there. Tell her to look and see.
I don't know if you heard that, but he said he thought that would be in there for sure.
Russ Tox, yeah.
Um, are there several different remedies for the effects of rabies vaccine? Is there?
Yes. There are several, not as many as, say, for vestibular. There's probably half a dozen or less. There's a couple that are real prominent. Sometimes you use the remedy made from the disease itself, but not so often. It's usually not that one. But you have to use you have to pick the right remedy. You see, that's a touchy one, rabies, disease
Yeah.
following rabies vaccination, because of its social context. The requirement for dogs to be vaccinated for rabies, let me back up. If you look on a vial, a box of rabies vaccine vials coming to the veterinarian, if you were to read the instructions, it says only to be used in healthy animals.
Yeah.
That is totally disregarded. They give it to
Yeah.
animals that are sick in all ways. Okay, so the reason that is a requirement is not coming necessarily from the veterinary profession. It's coming from the human medical profession, which wants you to vaccinate to protect people. So it's very tricky when you start getting, for example, say this person that asked the question brought their dog to me because it's acting anxious and aggressive and will bite people. And I give the homeopathic remedy, and maybe I make the wrong choice, even though I have experience. And the dog actually gets somewhat worse for a couple of days and bites more. You see the risk of that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I always tell people when I'm treating your dog, you keep your dog isolated for a couple of days. Don't let it be with other people where it might cause harm. That's important. So I'm not going to tell somebody online here to use this remedy or that remedy.
Right.
It's too tricky. You have to get the right one, and you have to be careful in how it's done.
So most importantly, work with a homeopath.
Yes, work with a
Yeah.
homeopath, and they will tell you what to give and evaluate it.
Okay.
And that's much safer and smarter to do.
And
not
on
get us
your
into trouble.
and not get anybody in trouble. And on your website, you have a list. We had mentioned, for those of you who are just coming in or haven't heard, on Dr. Pitcairn's website, he has a list of veterinarians that are still practicing, homeopaths that have studied underneath Dr. Pitcairn. So
There's more than that actually have studied, but what you'll see on the website is a list of those willing to be listed. And so don't feel that that's all. If you go to and find only 2 in your state, there's probably a lot more, but they just didn't want to be on the listing.
You know what is so interesting? I'm going to ask one more question, but before it, because we are up at our hour and I promise not to keep you too long. I find it interesting that more and more I want to start sending my clients to a homeopathic veterinarian, not just because they're homeopathic, but because so many of the holistic veterinarians are misguided. And so we call them, holistic. They don't really understand what holistic means. And so now I feel like if I get somebody, even if they don't want to do homeopath, they're going to have a better holistic veterinarian. Do you agree?
Yeah, holistic. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Sometimes holistic just means they combine different methods together. But really, holistic is looking at the whole animal. It come back to the for medicine for people. Our medical system has moved in the opposite direction, where we fragment the patient. So you go to one doctor for your heart, another one for your liver.
Yes.
But the homeopathic understanding is that's a mistake to do that, because there's only one whole patient.
Right.
And you have to treat the whole enchilada.
Because
you can't treat part of it.
It's all connected. Correct.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
The problem is the holistic vets aren't doing that. They're not doing that at all.
No, well, often they're not. And before I forget, Carrie, also another site people can go to is there's an homeopathic organization for veterinarians called the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy.
Oh, there you go.
Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy. And the website address is avh.org.
Okay. Lori will type that out.
avh.org. And you can go there and find also people listed. My website is maybe a little bit more reliable because the other organization can include people that weren't trained by us. But still, it's another resource for you.
That's good. That's good. Mm-hmm. All right. We have time for one more question.
I can take a little more time if you want.
You can? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how it goes. Let's do this one. So 10-month-old Cotton diagnosed with colitis today. And it says, "Help, please, doc. Wants to," I think this might be a typo, put her on cornstarch and hydrolyzed protein diet forever. Oh my God. And yes, you look marvelous.
Thank you.
What do you think of that?
If that were my client, I would put him on one of the recipes in our book, the 4th edition, because that usually clears up these things. Usually colitis, we'll talk about that Monday.
Yeah.
When we do our podcast. A lot of these problems like that with the bowels have to do with the food they're eating.
Okay.
And so if you change to a better quality food, then a lot of these things just resolve themselves without other treatment. So that's the first thing I would do. And again, homeopathy can deal with that.
And those recipes are in the 4th edition book, correct?
Yeah, the newer recipes is what I recommend. We'll talk about that Monday, why we changed it.
Yeah. So just so you know, on Monday we are doing a recorded. So the listeners that are listening right now probably won't hear this for a few weeks out, but we're going to be doing a lot of talking about plant-based diets and things that can help with this type thing of colitis. And I have a dog boarding with me right now who is on a lifetime of metronidazole, and it's really, really heartbreaking to watch this go. But I also understand from a pet parent, you don't want to watch your animal have this constant on
Right.
again, off again diarrhea. So they do what they think is the right thing to do.
Right.
There's no
Right.
pet parent out there who's doesn't care. It's just that they don't know any better. So that's why I bring people like Dr. Pitcairn on, and we
Yeah.
communicate and talk, and we continue to just try to get more and more information out there. So I'm excited to do this podcast about the plant-based diets.
There's really two aspects that I think are most important these days. That is, what we're talking about is how to best treat an animal so that their health is restored. And the other is how to have proper nutrition.
Yeah.
Both of those are equally important. And
Yeah.
I found in my practice, for example, and this goes back to earlier editions of our book, my practice I had in Oregon for 20 years doing homeopathic, primarily in nutrition. I was always busy as I had a waiting list. And when people would get on my waiting list, then we would send them the recipes, some of the recipes in the book. Here, get them started on this because we're going to recommend that to you.
Right.
And you'd be surprised how many people will call back and say, I don't have a problem anymore.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, but what's so, I had a conversation with Dr. Dodds many months ago. Yeah, Dr. Jean Dodds. And she had said that she would speak all over the world about vaccines and how we're over vaccinating these animals, and we really need to stop. And she said that after her talks, people would come up to her and say, well, my business will fail if I don't, because I make so much money off of these vaccines, my business will fail. And she, of course, schooled them and said, I don't do all these vaccines and my business is doing very well.
Mhm.
But it's the same with you, right? Just that's your job, is to keep the animals from coming to see you. And that's, to me, a sign of a really great veterinarian. Did you see the look on his face, the smile he got when he said they didn't have to come back to him anymore? I don't know if you guys noticed that, but I did. You just light up when you say how amazing it is that the animals didn't need you anymore.
No.
I just think that's your job. I think.
And it's a conscious, not that conscience, affected by what you described. I mean, it's hard for somebody. They know that the vaccines may not be the best thing to use, but they feel they have to do it to bring in enough income.
Right.
That's a real challenge to one's conscience.
Sure.
It's not easy to deal with.
It's not.
No.
I faced that myself very, very early on in owning my business that I own now. I've had for 21 years.
Yeah.
I left the veterinarian field. That's a long story. But coming from that field, I believed that flea and tick medication was safe and fine, and gave it and I sold it at my new business. And I made a lot of money off it until I realized it was causing harm.
Mhm.
And I knew I needed to pull it. And I'm not going to, I sat there and looked at the numbers and thought, this is going to be hard. This is really, really going to be hard. It's helping pay the rent. And if I can't pay the rent, then I don't have a business, and then I can't help the dogs the other way. You go round and round until finally you go back to the animal. And when you can do that, it's an easy decision when you can do that. And,
yeah, that's what it comes down to. And I understand the dilemma. I'm not going to judge anybody, but
sure. Me either. I was in that position before.
Yeah, sure.
And you get on your path when you get on your path. And, but I love that Dr. Dodds was teaching them that that's not true, that's not true. So,
and well, if I can digress a moment, I
Sure.
remember a couple of book titles I can give people that are really
Please.
interesting on the vaccination question. It's not just vaccination for animals, it's vaccination in general for people mostly, but it's the same issue, the same consideration for animals.
right.
One of them is called DPT, a shot in the dark.
It's a good title.
DPT, a shot in the dark. Yeah, it's not a new book. It's been out probably 15 years or so.
Okay.
Barbara Fisher, I think, is her name, and her son was damaged by vaccine. And she runs the National Vaccine Information Center. So that's a very good book. It's informative. Another one that I really like is Dissolving Illusions.
Wow.
Dissolving Illusions by Suzanne Humphreys. She's
These
an
are
MD.
some good names.
Yeah, and Suzanne Humphreys was a nephrologist who dealt with kidney problems in people.
Mhm.
And she found years ago that some of her patients were doing quite well until they got the flu vaccine, and then they crashed. And that turned her on to looking into it. And when she did, she started being shunned by her colleagues.
Yeah.
So anyway, she persisted, and she wrote a very interesting book about the history of vaccines. You learn a lot from it. Dissolving Illusions.
Thank you. Lori has put those up for you as the listeners. All of the information is there.
Yeah.
I think we're going to go ahead and head off unless there's anything. Is there anything else you want to make sure you say about homeopathy or?
Well, I'm going to say that people are going to hear, you're hearing some very positive things from me about it. Okay.
Sure.
And you'll also hear very negative things from other people that really haven't studied it, but the general, there's been since the early 1800s, there's been a conflict between homeopathy and the allopathic system. And the allopathic system won and became dominant. And I don't think we have time to go into the story, but it's interesting how they did it politically.
Yeah.
And they got the funding taken. It used to be back then, a century ago, with all the states that were in the Union at that time, they all had homeopathic medical schools and homeopathic hospitals. Some of them were huge buildings.
I just think this is, we talked about that on the podcast, and it's dumbfounded.
It is dumbfounding. And so they managed to shut them all down.
I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, wow, it's so sad to think of what, we've come to. And kind of in a way, when you think about it, we've all used things that are, even aspirin. Aspirin comes from a willow bark tree. And, you think about, it's all been there. It's been there right in front of us, but we pushed it aside. And now we hear horrible things about it. People think, if you use homeopathy, you're a whack job. If you're, I mean, some of the names that people have used to identify very brilliant people like yourself it's upsetting to think that, people don't know, exactly like you said in the very beginning, people poo-poo something that they don't know anything about.
Yeah, a lot of doctors and the medical people will poo-poo it. And they don't know anything about it. They just don't like it because it's not so physically oriented as I described. But also one other thing, just to emphasize how important homeopathy was in terms of, in the U.S., in terms of its success. And the reason it grew so much was it was so very successful, especially in epidemics. That'd be an interesting topic in itself. It was so amazingly effective.
Yeah.
In epidemics. So anyway, there is, I don't think we want to do it now. I could show you a picture, but it'd take me a while to find it. But there was the Dr. Hahnemann, Samuel Hahnemann, who originated homeopathy, as I described, who was in the, over 200 years ago, was in the area of Germany, was so appreciated and honored for what homeopathy had done, even in the US, that they built a monument for him. And the monument exists in Washington, D.C., about a mile from the White House, on a traffic circle.
That's amazing.
And it's still there. You can go and look at Hahnemann Monument, Washington, D.C., and there's a huge statue of him sitting in a chair up there.
Yeah.
That just tells you how much it was appreciated and used here.
Yeah, to have a statue.
Yes.
He was the father of homeopathy, but I don't know if anyone's ever said this to you, but you are the modern day Hahnemann. Like you are. And I don't mean that in a joking way. I think that it's such an amazing thing to be able to bring this back and have taught so many people. And I'm just so blessed to know you. And I hope someday someone makes a statue of you.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it would be great too. And maybe
Carrie, I'm a reincarnation.
Well, you're in Sedona. We got to be able to find somebody that can make a statue. Sedona's filled with art people, so somebody can probably.
My wife's an artist. Maybe I can get her to
what
do
is she writing on? I'm gonna have to talk to her.
She does paintings. So
yeah. We'll have to talk to her about, we're going to have to commission somebody to do a statue and keep it going. So, well,
No, I don't need one.
yeah, we need one as a reminder of how much you've given to these animals and to
Well,
these
many
pet
people
parents.
have. It's not just me. There have been other veterinarians and many famous, doctors that did amazing work over the
Yeah.
last 100 years or so. That's just their stories are incredible.
Yeah. But look at you. Here you are, retired, and you're still willing to come on, my little show and help people. I think it's really amazing, Dr. Pitcairn. I can't
Well,
thank you
thank
enough.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm excited about our next podcast. I hope all of you will follow and listen to that podcast when it's ready to be aired. So we'll move along further that way. So all right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and let him go. I hope that he was able to help you with your pets. I'm sure valuable information that you were there. Dr. Pitcairn, I will see you on Monday, and thank
Okay.
you so much. Lori's behind the scenes. Lori's been the one that's been typing out all of this stuff for you. So Lori, as always, thank you so much for being here and typing that out. There's no way I could focus on all of this at one time. So it's important to have you. So, all right, everybody, have a wonderful evening. We will see you soon. Take care, Dr. Pitcairn.
Okay. You too. Bye.
Bye.